Coming to you from the Spit Studios in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada. This is the Spit Sports Show. Well, it's kind of the news that Canucks fans have been on the edge of their seat for, somewhat anticipating, dreading, however you want to describe it. It kind of felt like this was the train coming down the tracks. Thatcher Demko has been shut down for the rest of the season for hip surgery. He will reportedly be ready for next season's training camp, but his 2025-26 campaign is over. This sucks for a litany of different reasons, but to me, there is a small light at the end of this tunnel that I will get into later. But just on its base level, since the latter stages of the 2023-24 season, Demko has been injured, pardon me, 6 separate times in only 47 appearances. That is just an unbelievable string of unlucky pulls and nicks and cracks here and there. 6 times in 47 appearances in net is practically unheard of for a goalie. And what's so scary about this specific injury that he had, it's apparently unrelated to what he had earlier in the season. It's apparently unrelated to the knee injury he had last season. Again, there's so many injuries, it's hard to keep track of them. But he also underwent a double hip surgery while he was still in college. So you have to wonder how that correlates to this new hip surgery that he's going to have to undergo. His last fully healthy season where he didn't deal with any of these nooks was back in 21-22, which feels like it was an entire lifetime ago for this Vancouver Canucks team, which has just been overhauled since that time frame. And what's even more disappointing, frightening, however you want to put it, is one of his best friends on the team, as reported by everybody, Tyler Myers, said, and I quote, "I don't think a lot of guys could handle what he's gone through. I think a lot of guys would be out of the league already." Now, I very much so understand that he's putting this in terms that are supposed to praise his very good friend and, speak to his toughness and resilience through all of these hard times that he's been through with his body. And he did a good job articulating that. But if you peel the curtain back and read between the lines, I think a lot of guys would be out of the league already with some of the injuries that he's had. Like, he is just reaching 30 at this point. He is supposed to be in the heart of his prime. And he was playing like it when he was healthy, especially at the start of the season. He was the only reason the Canucks even had a sliver of hope until, everything started to go wrong with injuries to other players and everything hit the fan. But this definitely goes into a grander point about how the Canucks have been managing their goaltender situation. This guy, Thatcher Demko, is starting a brand new $8.5 million extension next year. His extension hasn't even kicked in yet. I think most people, including myself, thought it was an insane contract at the time for Demko, even not knowing how much of a disaster this season would be. No one thought the team would be this bad, but I think everyone could acknowledge before the year, like, best case scenario, they win a playoff round. They were nowhere near realistic cup contention. So signing him, and again, this isn't me second guessing this. I have a YouTube show. You guys can go back in the archives and look at it. Signing him to an extension after a never before seen popliteus injury. I think that's how you pronounce it. Don't quote me. And multiple other lower body injuries. Like I said, hip surgeries and seven other nicks and knacks. It was an insane price to pay and an insane time to do it, especially when he had a year left on his deal anyways. They could have talked extension through this season after Demko, hopefully, again, looking back at last season, stayed healthy throughout this year. Then you could talk about a potential extension. And then it gets even crazier when you factor in that they had to pay Kevin Lankinen $4.5 million as basically Thatcher Demko insurance because, again, management, as silly as they are and as critical as I have been, they're not complete idiots. They understand that you need some insurance for the guy who's hurt all the time. So you have to pay a hefty price for a backup goaltender who, by the way, has been bad this year. Obviously, this means the Canucks will not be able to trade Demko anytime soon. Best case scenario, in my opinion, for the future here is he comes back next year healthy. He gets off to a similar start as he did this year. Because again, I think people forget because it seems like a lifetime ago how good he was to start off this season. He looked like a genuine Vezina candidate until everything started to hit the fan for this van team. But if he comes back and does that, you can start to look at potentially moving him halfway through the year because I don't see the Demko Canucks alignment now. Like all of the thinking behind the Vancouver Canucks organization, roster, hockey operations needs to be focused on the long-term future. And as grim as it is for me to say, looking into this camera right now, I don't know if Thatcher Demko has a long-term future. And that sucks, but Canucks fans saw it with Corey Schneider. He went out, what was he? Was he 33 when he retired? And he was awesome for a couple of years, but these nicks and knacks, they grind on your body, especially as a goalie of all positions, where the ability to stretch and put your body into uncomfortable contortions and situations is just part of your job description. It's just not easy. And again, it sucks so bad because he's an awesome, awesome goaltender. But the other point that I haven't seen anybody bring up yet is I wonder if this changes the front office's plans for their rebuild coming up. Because Rutherford, and I think it was Rutherford, it may have been Alvin, but one of the two, front facing organizational figureheads said, in fact, I'm like 90% sure this is Rutherford, but rebuilds will usually take 5 to 6 years. But we think we can do it in 2 to 3 because of the goaltending situation we have here, backstopping these young kids, which at the time I didn't think made a whole lot of sense, to be honest with you, because you have this goaltending tandem this season when you had Quinn Hughes and a talented roster and the team still sucked. But regardless, will this make them think even longer term about this rebuild, what it actually looks like? I think that can be a good thing because we know that this franchise has a raging itch to just inject the fast forward button into everything they do. We saw it last year when they got a first round pick from Miller and immediately flipped it into Marcus Pettersson. They have a great impatience for rebuilds and like they love retools. It's their favorite thing to do. So, will they be less likely to try to rush this rebuild now and, add a veteran piece at the deadline because, you want to get the rebuild going into the playoffs quicker? You know what? We've seen it a million times. They go out and get these veteran players who they think could potentially take them over the top to get a couple of home playoff games. Will they be less likely to do that knowing that you don't have one of the best goalies in the world and you don't have the pressure to build around one of the best goalies in the world like they would if they knew Demko was healthy? I may have said that awkwardly, but when you have an asset like Demko, who's obviously incredibly talented, you feel a certain need to extract as much as you can from that juice, get the most squeeze out of the juice you can. And I don't know how much juice Demko has left. It has just been a nightmare season of injuries for the Canucks. And I'm going to move on to another little topic, but it's off the same branch of this tree. More came against the Penguins. Boyum, God bless him. I respect him for coming back from the game, but he's going to have to be out for a couple of weeks. He got a nice puck to the face. But I want to talk about that Brock Besser elbow from Brian Rust and how I think this should wake up the organization when it comes to how they want to form this rebuild. So when Brock Besser took that elbow in front of the net from Rust, and by the way, it was a vicious elbow. He all but wound up and UFC'd that guy in front of the net. He had his elbow wound up for a long time. It was clearly intentional. It was clearly meant to hit him in the face. Just about as dirty as an elbow as you can possibly get, realistically. He had big speed coming into the net. It wasn't like he was just standing there. Everything about it was gross in all of the worst ways. But Drew O'Connor was knocked down, so he couldn't see it. But Elias Pettersson, Zeev Boyum, and Carlson were the only players on the ice at that point who could have realistically done something. And when I say do something, I think you guys know what I mean. Show Rust that that ain't going to fly here. And no one, for 1 second, the people I was watching the game with, thought they were going to do anything about it. That's an issue. No one did an absolute thing about it. Like Carlson, God bless him, went up and said some whispers to the guy, which I guess is something. But this team is way more talented than the 32nd ranked team in the league, especially when you had freaking Quinn Hughes on the blue line. They were still 30th ranked in the league. Why? Again, I don't think it's because of a lack of talent. Their forecheck is so soft. Guys do not finish checks. At the end of the day, in hockey, we can talk about the skill, talent, and the dekes and the highlights all we want. 90% of the game is played along the wall. It is all about the little plays in the corners, retaining puck possession, finishing checks, getting people off of their spot. That really counts in the margins to who wins these games. And the Canucks are so easy to play against along the walls. And basically everywhere where physicality is required in hockey. Like, if I go through this roster, and it's tough for me to picture in my head how this wasn't a factor. Like, you have DeBrusk, Pettersson, Carlson listed as your first line right now. None of those guys are doing anything in that situation with Rust. I'm just using that as an antithesis for my general point. DeBrusk maybe will say a couple things. Carlson whispered to him. Good job. Second line, Drew O'Connor, Philip Hedl, Jonathan Lecker-Mackey. I have no idea if Drew O'Connor would have said anything. I like to think he would have, but I know Hedl and Lecker-Mackey are staying as far away from that dispute as they possibly can. Third line, I think a couple of guys would. Ogren, Bluger, Carlson. I haven't really seen, Garland. I haven't seen Ogren really get into many scraps like that, but I don't feel like he'd be afraid to. He plays a pretty physical game, and Bluger and Garland are obviously pit bulls. But on the fourth line, too, Hoglander and Ratu certainly aren't, going out and tossing mitts around. And Evander Kane has gone off this team in about a week. So just going through their forward core, how many of those guys would you realistically say are a tough opponent to play against? Like, guys, the night before a game are thinking, oh, goodness, I have to go against Elias Pettersson in the corners. I have to go up against Philip Hedl on the forecheck. Jonathan Lecker-Mackey is going to be in front of the net. No one has the slightest trepidation about any of those players. They strike no fear into anybody's heart. So this goes into a greater issue that they need to address in this rebuild, which is you need to bring in guys who can grind you down in a playoff series. Even the Oilers, who are, again, one of the primary examples of that people use when they're like skill can work in the biggest moments. A, they haven't won a cup, and B, they have plenty of guys who can just go in there and stand up for somebody. Their entire defense core is like that. Zach Hyman, they have those kind of pit bull playoff performers who can get them and their skill players to the point where they're just hard enough to play against and they win enough battles along the walls that, again, Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl can take over like they do. The Canucks don't have that, and it needs to be addressed in this general rebuild, which, again, I think may be on a bit of a different path now, a longer-term path, now that Demko's long-term future is in big-time question. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I want to know, What would your guys' long-term plan be with Demko if you were the GM? How would you play out the rest of this season? Let me know in the comments below. I'm smart off this to where I can read all comments. Love doing so. So drop something down there. Please a like on the video if you enjoyed what you heard. Please subscribe if you really enjoyed it. The Spit Sports Show just at over 415 subscribers. Wow. Big things happening on this channel. Can't thank you all enough. And as always, I will see you all in the next one. Peace out. Love you guys.